Engage your brain and enter the mind's eye on Z Talk Radio. I'm your host, Brian Turnov, and we want you to expand your perspective with themindsEyemedia.com. Full archives for free, articles, blogs, social media, links up for everything, all up on themindsEyemedia.com. Once again, themindsEyemedia.com. It is June 9th, 2015, and it's finally starting to feel like summer after quite the long, dreadful winter and a forgetful spring. But when I think of summertime, I think of big movie blockbusters, most of which are forgettable action flicks and really retreads of old franchises these days. And for our second to last show before the seasonal summer break, we're going to celebrate the new movie season by talking about some of the most timeless movies in cinematic history, but with a little bit of a twist. Robert W. Sullivan IV, a philosopher, historian, and lawyer, will join us momentarily for a conversation on his latest book, Symbolism, a guide to the esoteric imagery in popular movies. Now, Robert examines the classical archetypes that are present in some of the most beloved pieces of film since the dawn of the medium, and the symbolism contained within this popular medium. This isn't just another case of the Illuminati, hidden mind control, yada yada yada. This is for the cinephile, the mythologist, and those really ready to take a peek behind the curtain of Hollywood's creative influence. See you on the other side of this break in just a few minutes on The Mind's Eye.
It was just one time. I thought it would be okay.
It is time to clap your digital hands and welcome to the show Robert W. Sullivan IV, philosopher, historian, antiquarian, theologian, and lawyer. Quite the Renaissance man, Robert. Thanks so much for slicing us a piece of your time.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me on Mind's Eye Radio Show. It's great to be with you this evening.
I'm really excited for this one. I like to consider myself somewhat of a cinephile, and I'm sure you do as well, obviously based on the book. So we're going to talk about some of my favorite movies, I'm sure some of your favorites, and our audience as well. But before we do, I want to find out a little bit more about the man behind the curtain, so to speak. And you're a lifelong Maryland man. I actually happened to live in Baltimore for about 8 years, 2000 to 2008. So I'm a really big fan of the place, and I really think it gets kind of a bad rep, especially now with the riots that recently kind of just happened. And I recently visited also, and it seems to kind of have settled down a bit. I'm just wondering, how close were you to the riots, and what was it like around that time?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't live too near where they were occurring. It was really an unfortunate incident all around. I will say that while they were going on, I somewhat just because of they had a curfew here, so that obviously limited my movement downtown and things like that. But it's just an unfortunate incident. It's not the first in Baltimore history. Probably won't be the last. But at any rate, things seem to be coming back down to normal at this point in time. And like I said, they affected me. I mean, I'm not going to come on here and say, I had nothing. I mean, they do affect you. They do affect you. I mean, it definitely has an impact of things you can and can't do. But all in all, right now, things definitely seem to be coming back down to normal.
To me, it seems like every time I visit back and when I live there, Baltimoreans, they love Maryland. Marylanders love Maryland. They love being there, and they seem to be very cordial with each other, even regardless of the race relations history there. So I was still taken back by what was going on there, but it seemed fairly justified. So, at least I'm glad to hear that everything on your end was good and everything was safe on your family as well.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Like I said, it was just kind of an unfortunate incident. I mean, we'll see how this plays out in the end. But like I said, right now things have definitely somewhat seemed, the National Guard's not here anymore and the curfew's lifted, so things have definitely come back down to normal.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And another thing that we actually have in common, Robert, is we're actually both part of the Masonic Brotherhood, and I actually was also raised in Maryland at the Concordia Lodge in Towson, if you're familiar, around 2008. And you're actually I'm sure, as you know, but our listeners, who are unfamiliar, you're a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, and for those who aren't really familiar with the Brethren, that's almost pretty much as high you can get, so you've obviously really put the time in. Well, what have you been up to Masonic-wise, and what have you been doing with the Lodge? Anything recently?
Well, no. Right now, I'm actually I'm familiar with Concordia Lodge. That's probably the three most famous lodges in and around Baltimore are that one, mine, and Washington Lodge. But no, right now, we're the lodge is actually getting ready to go dark for the summertime, and unfortunately, just due to my busy schedule, I haven't been as able to devote much time to the lodge as I probably should. But no, everything is, like I said, everything Masonically here is fine. I'm very familiar with your lodge. I was raised in a Blue Lodge amicable back in 1997, and 32nd was in 1999. But I'm actually, when you mentioned Freemasonry, I'm actually working on, although I'm somewhat putting it on the back burner for the time being, another book on Freemasonry. My first book was The Royal Arch of Enoch. I know you want to talk more about the cinema book, but actually I'm also the author of a Masonic book called The Royal Arch of Enoch, and I'm actually working on a follow-up book to that, which is going to kind of fill in some of the gaps in Royal Arch. So, when it comes to Freemasonry, it never ends, and another book on Freemasonry by yours truly is on the way, although that will probably be not for a while.
Yeah, I'm sure you have like 1,000 ideas for books right now, and and that's how it works, and that's a good problem I have. I believe that's what they say, that's. So I guess without further ado, let's talk about Shop on the Book. And you just did mention your first book, and we'll have to have you on for that, just to dedicate a whole show to it, because it really looks like a great piece of work, and I really want to delve into that. So I want to dedicate a whole show to that. But tonight's show, we're talking your other book, Cinema Symbolism, a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies. Just share the basic premise and really talk about where the seeds for the book were planted.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. This book was born out of the final chapter of the Royal Arch of Enoch. Like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We'll come back for another show on this. But to make a long story incredibly short, the final chapter of Royal Arch of Enoch dealt with what I would describe as sort of Masonic, Enochian, solar, esoteric symbolisms going on in certain movies. Some of the movies I took apart in Royal Arch of Enoch were National Treasure, National Treasure 2, Da Vinci Code, Excalibur, things like that. And I was seeing the same sort of themes in a ton of other movies, not necessarily Masonic per se. Some were Masonic, but just these very esoteric, mythological, numerological, occult, alchemical underpinnings, currents, themes, numbers in other movies. And naturally, I couldn't devote a whole, the Royal Arch of Enoch final chapter would never end, so I finished Royal Arch of Enoch, and I just literally went on to this second book titled Cinema Symbolism, where I just sort of dissected these esoteric themes that I was absolutely 100% certain of that were being presented in these popular movies that I had seen. Probably you've seen some of these movies as well, and this was the kernel and crux of Cinema Symbolism. Again, not to belabor it, but I'll just throw in just real quick that when I was finishing up Cinema Symbolism, there was more movies I wanted to talk about. I couldn't cover every movie, of course. So I'm actually writing Cinema Symbolism 2, its sequel, right now. That's still probably it is at least a year away, but that's another project that is well underway, and I'm actually writing right now. But Cinema Symbolism is out, and like I said, it documents these arcane and esoteric themes hidden beneath the celluloid surface in popular films.
I don't know how you do it, Robert, how you write so much. You got some great videos on YouTube. We'll talk about your social media links later. I definitely recommend our listeners to... why don't you just give out your YouTube page right now, and might as well, since I brought it up. You got some really great videos on there that really can... that relate to and really introduce what we're talking about tonight, too, so people can check it out. Just give out your YouTube page real quick, and any other social media.
Yeah, absolutely. My webpage, my actual webpage is www.robertwsullivan.iv.com. My name is Robert W. Sullivan IV, so my website is robertwsullivan.iv.com. From there's links to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Robert W. Sullivan IV. From my website, there's a link to my Twitter page, Facebook fan pages, of course, links to buy my books, both Royal Arch and Cinema Symbolism. The paperbacks will be back shortly. but you can get the Kindles and ebooks versions now. That's in Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook. It's in the Apple iBookstore. Again, paperbacks will be returning shortly. But again, the easiest way to navigate all this is just go to my website, which is robertwsullivaniv.com. Links to all my social media, including my YouTube channel. You can watch videos I produced on this subject matter. There's another podcast and radio shows I've done. Twitter link, Google Plus, Facebook fan pages, it's all there. More information about me, again, www.robertwsullivaniv.com.
And they're going to work as a great companion pieces for tonight's interview, and obviously for the listeners that want to follow up on the Royal Ark of Enoch and also more on symbolism. So I definitely recommend for the listener to check out the social media pages, specifically the videos on YouTube. All right, well, let's get down to business here, and let's explain how the occult, we look at the occult, it's the supernatural, the mystical beliefs, practices. Talk about how they've influenced Hollywood a bit more, and specifically talk about, I guess, Jung and Campbell and how they come into play with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you're dealing with, when you're dealing with this material in these movies, the million-dollar question that's always asked is this stuff intentionally placed in a film?
Of course.
My answer is yes. I believe it is intentionally placed. What I would somewhat disagree with a lot of the material that's out there is the motivation for putting it in. There's a world of people out there who will tell you this is all demonic, evil CIA mind control. And I do believe that some of this is very subliminal. But I think it's more of the idea of incorporating this material or putting it in a film is very similar to like an architect incorporating sacred geometry into their works. It gives the architecture a sense of the divine, and it's the same thing with a movie. It turns the movie into living mythology. Is really the way I see it. I mean, I'm not naive. I know the CIA has funded some, government, some Hollywood films. I know that there's been placement in movies of weaponry. I'm fully aware of this. But by and large, I think a lot of this mythological, occult underpinnings, I think it is intentionally placed, but I think it imbues the movie with this very deep, dark, mystical, mythological undercurrent, which really turns it into living modern-day mythology. I'll start with Campbell. Campbell's very important in this. Joseph Campbell is a very famous American symbolist and mythologist, and I guess his magnum opus is a book called, he wrote several books, but the one everyone knows him for is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in a nutshell, I'm just plowing through this material right now because I know we're somewhat limited on time.
Of course, yeah.
This book documents this sort of what the hero's journey, which in a nutshell is the solar journey, and certain things and happenings occur to this solar hero along the way. And this whole solar journey and this hero with a thousand faces is really the template of many a Hollywood blockbuster, including but not limited to Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, things like that. Carl Gustav Jung is a very famous psychologist, psychiatrist, and he got into this whole thing of what is called the collective unconscious, where as human beings we are inherently influenced by things that are in our unconscious mind that influence us, and we don't know what they are. And he wrote that ideas coming out of the collective unconscious related to astrology, ancient religion, Gnosticism, Tarot, alchemy, the occult, supernatural, Kabbalah, things of that nature. And the idea behind this is, you can look at it really twofold, is that either the movie makers are aware of this and are tapping into our unconscious mind and they're hooking us on this material, which is a very valid argument. I really have trouble arguing with that. But then you can also turn it around and turn it on the filmmaker and say, the maker of these movies are also under the influence of this. So perhaps in their unconscious mind, they're incorporating this material into these films unbeknowingly and unknowingly. And there is a few instances where you can document this, where there is a filmmaker who is putting themes in a movie where it's very apparent that the filmmaker had no idea of these doctrines, yet there they are in his film. So that's a twofold way of looking at that. But make a long story incredibly short, I do, in the end of the day, I wrote a whole 500-page book on this. I do believe that we are well beyond coincidence, and especially the lengths and some of the real details when you're looking at these movies. The filmmakers will go, the lengths they'll go to incorporate this arcana. It's really astounding. Even some of the movies I'm working on right now, it's really incredible, some of the things that I'm finding out. But in a nutshell, Carl Gustav Jung and Joseph Campbell are both very important figures in the study, in my opinion.
When it comes to collective unconscious, and maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, and particularly when it comes to archetypes, I think about it, is it like the chicken or the egg? Were these things here before us, or did we, throughout history, just start incorporating various events into these archetypes? To me, it's almost like part of this is the chicken and egg argument, too, in a sense.
Well, right. That's one way of looking at it. It's the idea is that it's just an inherited body of material that is just and passed on from one generation to the next, and it's just so embedded in us that we're not even necessarily aware of it. But yeah, I mean, it most likely dates back. You can trace it back to the beginnings of mankind, and you're dealing with astrological themes, the worship of the sun and the moon, the stars, and this mythology, these archetypes. This is where a lot of this material stems from. The hero's journey, the solar journey, combating darkness, the ideas of Gnosticism, or this overarching theme of light versus dark within the cosmos. This is all ties into this. And again, the whole idea of light versus dark, good versus evil. I mean, my goodness gracious. I mean, if this isn't a theme in movies, I don't know what is. But it's an important study, and like I said, if a person is listening to this and is not familiar with this, I go much more into it in the book, breaking down Jung and Campbell and how it relates to these films. People
hear the word occult. A lot of people I know will think about Satanists, and it really almost has a negative connotation automatically to it nowadays. And in my opinion, and in my experiences, in my studies, and I'm sure in yours, occult themes and ideas and philosophies can be quite positive, and it's really just another way of looking at the world. Why do you think the occult has become, or the word occult and the idea of cult and the concept has grown negatively?
Yeah, I mean, the word occult does carry a negative connotation. It comes from the Latin word occultus, just meaning hidden. It just literally means hidden, is what it means. But of course, you say it to a person, and you're right. People think of witchcraft and demonism, things like that, and it can connote that. I mean, it can mean that. But you're right. It can also be, it doesn't necessarily have to mean, a sinister theme. It can be positive, it can be neutral. So when I talk about it, when I say these occult themes, I'm talking about hidden themes, but also it has to be, when I use the word occult, I mean, I'm also, interpreting the word as to be somewhat mystical, and, I wouldn't go so far as to say supernatural, arcane, mystical, esoteric, that's probably a very good word, when it comes to these themes. So, I mean, you could technically say, like if you have, if you're a janitor and you know of a hidden area in the basement of a school, you could say, well, this janitor has occult information. That's really not the context I'm using it in. I'm using it much more, and I think you are as well.
Right.
More meaning hidden, but with a hint towards the esoteric and arcane. And again, it does tie into the movie Symbolism, because a lot of the stuff, if not all of it, is very hidden and it is very esoteric.
We're going to be weaving in and out of cinematic history, but I kind of want to start with something a bit more recent. The original Matrix film, not only was it visually stunning, but even more importantly, in my opinion, it was really thought-provoking. And you believe that the Wachowskis, who are the writers and the directors of the film, interweaved Gnostic philosophy into it. Talk about what Gnosticism is and how they incorporated it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Brian. I would say to you that to you and your listeners that if you want to look at a Gnostic movie, if you want to see the Gnostic religion on screen, the first Matrix movies is one of the godfathers of this. Gnosticism there are various themes and elements in it, but it's the idea of pursuing divine, esoteric, occult wisdom, generally termed Sophia, which is a reference to the sacred feminine, which could put you into the touch with a spiritual god. Within Gnosticism, there is this character called the Demiurge, who is this lesser god, who is the god of the material world. And you have these various Gnostic schools of thought, both of which turn up in the Matrix. You have this one, there was a Gnostic philosopher called Mani, and Mani believed in this whole overarching theme of light versus darkness, good versus evil. It's what's known as Manichaean cosmology. There was this whole universal struggle between light versus dark and good versus evil. And of course, this turns up in Gnosticism of the god, this demiurge, is this evil god of the material world, and the way to shrug this god off is to pursue spiritual pursuits, esoteric wisdom. This puts you in touch with the, quote unquote, God above God, this spiritual entity who is superior than the demiurge. And many Gnostics, it's the idea of awakening to divine light, having a divine spark, learning your place in life. And then this ties into another Gnostic philosopher. There's a couple others, but the other main one is Valentinus. And he followed this same philosophy that he led a select band of followers who had lived in poverty, shrugged off the material world to pursue spiritual truths. And this is exactly what the Matrix movie is. You're presented with this false reality, this materialistic reality, the 9-to-5 reality, which is bogus. It's not real. It's the creation of this lesser character called the architect of all things. This is the demiurge. He turns up in part 2 called the architect. And to keep the humans in line and to keep the humans in touch, and not seeking the spiritual and keeping them in this sort of material prison, the demiurge has this group called the archons, which is this sort of evil horde of angels that, can be both good or bad, that sort of enforce the will of the demiurge. And of course, this turns up in the Matrix as the agents, led by Agent Smith, who are the enforcers of the architect. But then you have Neo, or Neo Anderson, who's realizing this and sort of has this, knows the material world is bogus and wants to get rid of it for the spiritual awakening, spiritual truth. And of course, this is what he does. He joins this Valentinian crew of the Nebuchadnezzar, led by Morpheus. Interesting name to give to this guy. Morpheus, in mythology, is the god of dreams and sleep. Yet it's Morpheus who wakes up Neo to the real world. And Neo's going to shrug off the material world, awaken to the true spiritual world, which is that the material world is bogus, and that there's this select band of followers who are combating this evil demiurge and the archons, and he, of course, joins up with them. And, of course, where do they hang out? They want to hang out in Zion, which is the Holy Land. No surprise there. So you have this very deep Gnostic themes going on inside the Matrix movie, and you'll get these symbols coming. We'll just delve into this briefly, but you have when Neo wakes up to the truth that he's in the spiritual world, he gets lifted like Jesus, cruciform towards the light in the craft. When he gets brought on board the deck of the Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to see the nameplate which says Mark 3:11. That's a reference to the biblical verse Mark 3:11, which says, "Thou art the Son of Man, and all dark demons bow down before you." This is imbuing Neo as this Christ-like Savior, this Gnostic spiritual resurrector of mankind. And of course, we talked about earlier Sophia, sacred feminine wisdom. Sophia in Gnosticism was part of the Holy Trinity. So who's the sacred feminine to Neo? Trinity of all things. So you have this very esoteric Gnostic religion going on inside the Matrix. It's a whole study in the book. I have a whole chapter dedicated to the Matrix movies. It's a fascinating study, really a ton of esoteric symbolism going on, a lot of play on the numbers with the number 101 and the number 303. It definitely, when you get into this, Brian, and you really start dissecting this movie, it is without question that this isn't, this is clearly intentionally placed and is well beyond the coincidence level. And again, just for time considerations, I'm just hitting on some of this. There's much more to it. But Gnosticism is a very popular theme in Hollywood. We Matrix real quick. Truman Show's another one of these type of movies, and so is Fight Club. Very Gnostic films. But probably the first Matrix movie, I would say, is probably the godfather of the Gnostic religion.
Do the Wachowskis, I don't know if you know this offhand, do they claim themselves as Gnostics? Do any...
Oh, I think it's more, whether or not they actually practice the Gnostic religion, I couldn't tell you. I know for a fact right now, and you may not be aware of this, it's no big deal, the Wachowski brothers are now the Wachowski siblings.
Right, yes, of course.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to get into that. But, whether these guys are actually practicing Gnostics, I really couldn't tell you, but I am absolutely 100% certain that they are very familiar with this, as evidenced by it being placed in the Matrix. I mean, there's other evidence of this, and again, I'm going over this just a mile a minute, but we touched on some of the biggies. But no, I am convinced that I don't know whether they're Gnostics, but I know that's a Gnostic movie.
I want to stay on the Matrix for a second, because you brought up
Sure.
how numerology is, and numbers are a really big part of it, and for the listeners, just a quick synopsis. Numerology, essentially, it's just the belief in that there's a divine, godlike relationship between numbers and events. And specifically in the book, Cinema Symbolism, we're talking with Robert Sullivan IV on Cinema Symbolism, his book, specifically they reference in The Matrix 9/11, which is obviously one of the most tragic events in recent history. Share some examples of the numerology there, and specifically in regard to 9/11.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of videos that have been put out, tracing this 9/11 turning up, going back, all the way to the 1970s. I mean, I really have a hard time believing, that is really referring to the events of September 11th, 2001. It's the idea of movies as prophecy is an interesting subject matter. Whether these movies, we talk about the collective unconscious being inherited. Is the collective unconscious also predictive? That's a whole other study. That is a very controversial subject matter, because there is clearly evidence of movies predicting things that have come to pass, and some are very uncanny. Some are probably coincidence, but some are you are into the area of, you just can't make this up. And The Matrix is one of them. This is a movie that was released approximately 2 years prior to the events of September 11th, 2001, and it is without question the most startling usage of the 9/11/01 reference in a film, because it only turns up very briefly, but Neo's passport actually expires on September 11th, 2001. And if you look at it closely, you also revealed Neo's birth date, which also has esoteric meaning. The birth date of Neo, I want to say, is September 13th, 1971, which is the date of the Attica prison riots, where the state was called in by Rockefeller to suppress the Attica prison riots. But this is, of course, the birthday of the savior of mankind, who is going to free mankind from the prison-like constructs of the Matrix. So Neo's birth date is very dualistic in nature. And I should just point out, dualism is a very key component in Gnosticism as well. But then you have the expiration date of Neo's passport, which is 9/11/2001. It's impossible to reconcile. I have no explanation for it. I know it's there, but it's in there, and it's disturbing because of the idea. If you saw a 9/11 reference here or there or whatever, but it's just the theme of the Matrix movie, of the idea of destruction of the material, awakening to the spiritual, and then of course you have the whole 9/11 thing of 2001 being the destruction, perhaps announcing the birth of a new age. This has been prophesized by Kabbalists since the Renaissance, and this is even in the Bible, that the end of one solar age is heralded with great destruction, and the start of a new one is also, is a destructive birthing process. And of course, this is what you have in the Matrix movie: the destruction of the material, the birthing of the spiritual. I mean, even in we get into the concept of solar ages, and this is probably for the Royal Arch of Enoch show. But if you remember in the Matrix, even in the you talk about Neo being this Christ-like savior and the solar attributes afforded to Jesus. At the end of the Matrix trilogy, in the final Matrix movie, the sun's rising over the horizon, and the little girl says, "Oh, look, Neo." And it's identifying even Neo as the sun god. So you have these very dark themes going on, very esoteric. But it's there, Brian. And like I said, I can't explain it. You could maybe craft an argument that the collective unconscious is predictive as well, but that's a whole other study. Other to say that it's in the movie, and it is probably without question the most disturbing 9/11 reference prior to September 11th, 2001.
It doesn't sound like anyone has ever asked, or at least the Wachowski's siblings have ever given an answer, why they chose 9/11 as the passport date, because obviously dates and numbers are important to them, and they incorporate it.
Right. I mean, they probably have never been asked, or they're just going to shrug it off as a coincidence. Just not to change the subject too much, but just since we're interweaving with this, an example of this I can tell you is where something like this has happened in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Kubrick changed the number of the hotel room to 237,
right.
And there's reason for that. The original date, or the original number in the book in King's novel was 213. and Kubrick changed it. And King asked Kubrick, he said, why did you change the number? And Kubrick just shrugged him off and said, artistic license, but that number does have some very esoteric meaning on a number of levels. But to my knowledge, the Wachowskis have never been asked or have provided an explanation for it.
Tell me about 237. I watched the documentary Room 237, but since you just touched on it, Kubrick, why did he choose 237?
Well, there's several reasons for this. I've seen 237 too. You have the whole idea, and I'm not sure I really buy into this, Brian, 100% right now, is you have the whole idea that Kubrick was the guy who filmed the moon landing footage of Apollo 11, of the guys jumping around on the moon. Whether they went or not is unknown, but the idea is that they couldn't obviously film on the moon because they didn't have the technology. So Kubrick is somewhat revealing this in The Shining, where the little boy stands up with the Apollo 11 sweater on, as the rocket launch, then goes to the room 237, and of course in the late 80s, the moon's distance to the Earth was approximately 237,000 miles, so it's the little boy, Apollo 11, going to the moon, and this is Kubrick's, tip-off that he filmed it. I'm not sure if I'm familiar with it, I'm not sure I'm willing to buy into it, but the number 237 also, what is definitely going on inside The Shining, in Stanley Kubrick's Shining, and this is documentable, this is actually something I touch on in Cinema Symbolism, but I go into much more detail in Cinema Symbolism too. The book I'm writing right now is, you will find a constant repetition of numbers and symbols, and the number 2, and just a constant repetition of twos, numbers, and what Kubrick is doing, he's using this to symbolize or represent this repetitive, vicious reincarnation cycle going on inside the Overlook. So you get 237 if you add the numbers up, you get the number 12. The number 12 repeats all over the place inside The Shining. And if you multiply them, you get the number 42. And believe it or not, the number 42 repeats itself all over the place. So you have this repetition going on inside The Shining. It's really, I am not kidding you, Brian, the lengths that Kubrick went to inside The Shining to repeat things and place twos and numbers inside that film is so astounding. Even it boggles my mind, even now doing the study on it. But you have the whole thing with the moon landing with 237, but then you also have this number 12, number 42, numerological reference. These are numbers that constantly are repeating inside The Shining, and Kubrick is doing this to embed in your subconscious mind this never-ending reincarnation repetitive cycle going on inside the Overlook Hotel.
God, he is a master and a genius. I can watch a Kubrick film anytime, and now I'm gonna have to rewatch The Shining tonight. I'm gonna do that after the interview right afterwards, and then I'm gonna have to look at all the numbers and interpret it. It's so funny now that I've rewatched a bunch of the movies that we've talked about since I've read it, your books in Symbolism. It's like almost hard to ignore now. It's amazing how you can go from one perspective or a lack of perspective on something, and then once you just bring it up, you can't even ignore it in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting study. I've been asked, Brian. People have asked me, how is it? Can you watch a movie and be entertained? The answer is yes. I mean, when I go to a movie in a theater, I can't do this study sitting in a darkened movie theater watching it once. To do this properly, now if I do that, I may make mental notes if I see something that stands out. But to do this study properly, for starters, I have to be 100% convinced that this is actually going on inside a movie. I live by the mantra of when in doubt, throw it out. If I cannot pin this down, I'm a lawyer. If there's something I wouldn't be comfortable presenting to a judge or jury, I don't put it in. It has to be something I'm 100% convinced about. To do this study properly, I have to have the movie at my fingertips, so I need the DVD or Blu-ray. I don't go to the movie theater over and over and over time. I have to have a pad, a legal pad in front of me and a pen.
It'd be a little expensive.
And I have to have the movie, and pause, go back, forward, stop, listen to a line, watch it again. It takes me at least 3 or 4 times to watch a movie to get to really begin to pick up. But you're right. It's one of those things. But if it's a movie, for me right now, if it's a movie where I know this stuff is going on in it, and I've documented it, like The Shining, for instance. This is something I mentioned in the Cinema Symbolism book, but I'm going going into much more detail in cinema symbolism too. I think pretty much I've picked up on everything, but even now when I watch it, I always kind of watch it with this eye of, has something snuck by me? Has Kubrick interwoven something that I'm not quite picking up on? Because this has actually happened to me. I've watched a movie and thought I pinned down everything in it, and then sure enough, I watched the movie again, 2 months later on DVD or Blu-ray, and I'm watching, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, come on. How did I miss this? And I'll pause it, and I'll go do some research. I'll be like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. So I've, got to throw it in cinema symbolism, too, if I accidentally left it out of cinema symbolism 1. So it does happen, but to do the study proper, I've got to have the DVD or Blu-ray and be able to have the movie at my fingertips.
Yeah, otherwise that'd be a pretty expensive habit to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to bring it back a little bit, a few decades before, but even though I guess he's a pretty current character too, James Bond. I have to say it that way, obviously. He is obviously one of the most popular characters ever to grace grace the movies, and in one of the most enduring franchises. Agent 007. Obviously, this number isn't just a coincidence. By now, we can kind of tell they're put on purpose. Well, why did Ian Fleming, the writer of James Bond, pick 007?
Oh, yeah, this is one of my all-time favorite talking points. Make a long story short is Ian Fleming, during World War II, was in British intelligence, and one of the guys he was responsible for was none other than Aleister Crowley. Crowley was a double agent for the British Crown. Of course, he's more known for his occult workings and ceremonial magic, and he was a Freemason, Golden Dawner, OTO, influenced Jack Parsons, but had a heavy influence on Ian Fleming, and of course, we have a lot of very mystical themes going on in James Bond, but Ian Fleming decided to pay homage with that 007 numerological designation of Bond to this Elizabethan spy master named Dr. John Dee. And Dr. John Dee was Queen Elizabeth I's court astrologer. He predicted the date of January 15th, 1559, for her to be coronated. He said, if you get coronated on this day, you'll have this great golden reign. There's a reason he picked that date. It has astrological meaning. It has some other symbolism as well. But he served as, he was in the spy ring with Sir Francis Walsingham to build up this sort of spy ring around Queen Elizabeth to keep her safe from the Society of Jesus and radical Roman Catholics inside of England. And people involved with the spy ring were his Irish medium friend Edward Kelly, Giordano Bruno, the Dominican friar, was involved with this, Drake and Raleigh, the navigators, and Walsingham was in charge with this. And of course, when this has been well documented, but it's a fantastic story. When Dee would write an espionage correspondence to Queen Elizabeth I, he used to sign the document 007, 007. The actual sigil is meant to be eyeglasses. It's 2 circles with a line over them and then a line down the side. It looks like a 7. And the eyeglasses meant that he was her eyes in the field, or alternatively, that the correspondence was for her eyes only. And of course, this is where the term "for your eyes only" comes from, and which is also the title of a James Bond movie. So Fleming pays homage to Dr. John Dee, this very early Elizabethan spy master, who's a very important character in English history. Unfortunately, he's been written out of the history books, but very important man when it came to navigating. Wrote a treatise on that. Wrote a treatise on Euclid, mathematics. Was into numerology, Pythagoras, astrology. Very important character. Developed a source of conjuring called Enochian magic, but also served as a spy master. And Ian Fleming with James Bond 007 is a direct reference to Dr. John Dee.
Some people think that Ian Fleming, I guess it was the first James Bond novel, Casino Royale, as an ode to his his relationship with occultism and his relationship with Aleister Crowley, his friendship. Well, what are your thoughts there? Is it just strictly, is 007 the only really occult, sense of reference there, or is there much more?
Oh, no. A lot of the James Bond movies, and novels, contain occult themes. I can't speak directly on Casino Royale having a reference to Crowley, but a lot of the themes in these books, and you may be right, I'm not saying it is or isn't, I can't say 100% certain.
That's lawyering.
But a lot of the themes, you have the themes of Live and Let Die with the occult, with the tarot cards. You have a lot of themes going on in the James Bond stories, revolving around World War II characters. Dr. No is a veiled allegory to Hermann Goring. You have, alchemical themes in Goldfinger, the guy transmuting the gold from base, or making the gold at Fort Knox worthless, thereby making his gold worth more money. You've got the dragon, Hugo Drax. So you have these very mystical themes. You've got ideas of the unification of the sun and moon, James Bond being this masculine sun. He has to unify with the sacred moon, the divine feminine, the moon, the sacred feminine, which is, of course, the Bond girl, whose name is always overwrought with sexual symbolism, female sexual symbolism. Then he becomes, perfected, spiritually equipped to go on and defeat this over-the-top enemy. You've got the Hermes Trismegistus wizard character, Q, who always provides Bond with the sacred piece of wisdom, which in the Bond stories are, this gadget that always winds up saving his life. We talked about Gnosticism earlier. You could craft an argument that Bond is a straight Manichaean, views the world in good and evil, no gray areas. You're either good or you're evil. He would view himself as the bad guy, and of course the evil has to be destroyed. On a side tangent, another character who I would describe as a straight Manichaean is the TV character Buffy the Vampire Slayer, person who views the world in good and evil, black and white. You're either good, a vampire, or bad, a vampire be destroyed, or a good guy, you're light, and you're worth saving. So you have Gnostic themes with Bond as well. The alchemical wedding, the unification of the sun and moon. So no, the Bond movies are very mystical in nature. I get into this much more inside the book. But you mentioned Aleister Crowley with Fleming, another guy who, this I can tell you, another guy who moved in this spy circle, this espionage circle with Fleming and Crowley was none other than Dennis Wheatley. And Wheatley wrote a novel called The Devil Rides Out, which was made into a Hammer horror movie in the late 1960s. And this involves black magic, Goetia magic, and there is a character in that story called Mokata. He's in the book and he's in the movie. In the movie, he's played by Charles Gray, who actually played Blofeld, one of the Bond villains in one of the Bond movies. But Mokata is definitely an homage, a reference to Aleister Crowley, no doubt about it. There's a scene in the book and the movie where Mokata summons the goat of Mendes, and this is a clear reference to Aleister Crowley's Goetia magic, the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage, things like that. So within Wheatley's Devil Rides Out, you will clearly have an Aleister Crowley character, no question about it.
And we're talking a lot about light and dark and dualism, and I just want to stay on the darker side, I guess, for a moment of Hollywood and the occult. And I'm just wondering, you don't really talk much about this, but in the book, but I'm just wondering, have you seen any, I guess, Satanist, occultist elements in movies anywhere? Or?
Well, when you say that, are you talking about like overt? Yes. I'll reference this ties into what we were just
more covert than overt.
I would say. No, go ahead.
I was going to say more covert than overt, because some of the overt ones are pretty obvious. A lot of them obviously are going to be horror flicks. But what about covertly that they didn't really want you to know, but they were still putting it there?
Well, like things that come to my mind with what we were talking about is like the Rosemary's Baby movie, and you actually had the character of Mercata, who is actually a reference to Mokata, the same character in this Dennis Wheatley novel. The Ira Levin black magician in Rosemary's Baby is Stephen Mercata, and the names are phonetically the same. So you have this very esoteric reference to Mokata of Devil Rides Out. But then you get into somewhat of a veiled satanic theme. I guess Disney's Fantasia kind of comes to mind, Night of Bald Mountain, where you have this very deep, dark, hellish, satanic sort of musical number going on in that. But it's somewhat beneath the surface. It's there when you realize it, but maybe a little bit beneath the surface. I'm trying to think. I wouldn't necessarily. There is a field of study that says, a lot of people believe that this hidden symbolism is satanic and evil. I don't buy into that. You can have satanic themes in movies. and demonic themes in movies, and you can have themes where demons are portrayed positively. This comes out of the Book of Enoch. You look at movies like Maleficent with Angelina Jolie, who's the fallen angel with the horns, has the wings clipped and becomes evil. This whole idea of Enochian demons, you'll find this adroitly concealed in some movies. And again, with Satanism, this Night on Bald Mountain comes to mind, and then Rosemary's Baby, of course, that comes to mind as well. And of course, you get into The Exorcist. Not so covert so much there, although you have a lot going on inside The Exorcist that is very veiled, some very unique symbolism going on in that. But no, I mean, you'll find themes of like some religious themes going on inside. I wouldn't call it satanic, but like a movie, and this will go by a lot of people. It's a movie that I'm actually writing in Cinema Symbolism too. The Martin Scorsese movie Gangs of New York has a very overarching religious struggle, a religious theme of good versus evil, God versus the devil in that movie. With the Amsterdam Vallon character against Bill Cutting, you have this very religious undercurrents going on inside of that movie, with Amsterdam being this Christ-like savior of New York City, and the Daniel Day-Lewis character being sort of this demonic character who wants to cling to the past and is sort of reactionary. And it's very veiled, Brian. It's very beneath the surface, but you have this very theme of God versus the devil in Gangs of New York. It's a movie I'm taking on in Cinema Symbolism too, actually. In fact, I have a whole chapter to it. So that would really be my answer to that. And again, I'm sure it's out there, but those are some of the movies that would just come to mind off that question.
Don't expect an Illuminati, conspiracy, Satanist type of book. This is really just, we're talking a lot about mythology, so don't go into that expecting the book, and if you don't go in that, you'll be so much happier by the end of it, and you'll come with such a fuller understanding of history and mythology, and it really is a fantastic book. And we definitely still have a few more minutes, so I want to talk about one of my favorite all-time movies. I'm an 80s child, so I think I have to talk about it, and that is the Back to the Future trilogies.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, you just hit on probably one of my all-time favorite movie trilogies to dissect. That was probably, that and the Wizard of Oz chapter were probably my two favorite chapters to write. Probably even more Back to the Future, because that really is a trilogy that is one of those movies where you wouldn't expect to find anything, but is really overwrought and overloaded with very, very well concealed Egyptian solar symbolism. You have the entire Egyptian religion on screen. It's very adroitly concealed, with characters like Biff Tannen being Typhon. I mean, their names are almost phonetically the same.
Wow,
You've got
yeah.
Osiris, Isis, and Horus as the McFly family, and they're the Egyptian solar family. They live in Lion Estate, which is a reference to Leo the Lion, Soul House of the Sun. You've got the Sun Chariot with the DeLorean, 88 miles an hour. That is a very adroitly reference to the sun, which ties into the lightning striking the clock tower at 10:04 at night. You have the Hermes Trismegistus wizard character, Egyptian wizard character, who is Doc Brown, and you'll find the number 5 surrounding Doc Brown. He invents time travel on November 5th, 1955. That is a reference to the 5th card of the Egyptian tarot, known as the Hierophant, which Aleister Crowley interpreted as the master of space-time. This is why Brown is the inventor of this, manipulator of the space-time continuum. A ton of information going on. Zemeckis wreaks havoc with you, with your unconscious mind, with buildings. Buildings in 1985 have dualistic reversed meanings in 2015, and in 1885 you have the beginning of the Back to the Future movie. Literally, he takes you back to the future. The very first Back to the Future movie, the opening sequence is actually the end of the movie, where you're going over the clocks, the timepieces. You will find all the elements that occur at the very end of the movie being foreshadowed at this very beginning. It's a fantastic study. I'm just touching on it. It's a chapter in Cinema Symbolism, and it was probably, Brian, one of my all-time favorite chapters to write, just because of all all the hidden symbolism going on inside that movie. And like I said, it was a series of movies that you wouldn't expect to. I mean, some of the movies, you read George Lucas or you listen to a Lucas interview, him talking about Star Wars, and he talks about Campbell, so you kind of know to expect it, or you know where to look. Then you read Campbell's book, you'll have the aha moment. Oh, this is what he's talking about. But the Back to the Future movies are just so well concealed and just so esoteric with this whole Egyptian symbolism. That was just really, really a great joy and triumph for me to break those movies down and present them in cinema symbolism. And it was probably my most favorite chapter to write. Again, I'm just touching on this because of time constraints, but read the book for a much more detailed breakdown of Back to the Future, all three of them.
Yes, from my understanding of the Osiris myth, that it's obviously complex and deals with a lot of different different aspects of Egyptian society and themes and concepts, but specifically it deals with death and the afterlife. How does Back to the Trilogy incorporate that idea of?
Well, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You have the whole idea. I mean, keep in mind also, we say this. We say the Egyptian, religion. I mean, some of these movies, are not straight. It's definitely influencing it. It's, does have,
a homage.
Zemeckis does use some artistic license with the thing, but you have the whole idea. One of the things with the afterlife and death, with Back to the Future, with Osiris, who is of course killed by Typhon in the Egyptian lore, and he is resurrected by Isis, his virgin consort wife, and with the assistance of Horus, and Horus becomes a sort of solar stand-in, and Osiris goes off and becomes the solar god of the underworld. Well, in Back to the Future, this is exactly what happens. You have Biff Tannen, who is Typhon, who is the enemy of the solar family. He would be your Set, dark figure. Set in Greek mythology was called Typhon, and of course the name Typhon is Tannen. It's all but the same name. And of course, what does he do? He murders Osiris. He kills him. And this is in Back to the Future too. Typhon murders Osiris, who is George McFly, and he's dead. And it's of course Lorraine, who would be the Isis character. It would be the Isis personification. Her and Horus, who is Marty. It's the two of them who are able to figure out what Biff's done. And go back and Marty goes back in time, and then what's he do? He destroys the sports almanac, and what's he do? He resurrects Osiris. Osiris is brought back to life. I mean, he says that my father's alive. So you have this whole idea with George McFly as Osiris being dead and resurrected, which is a massive component of the Osirian cycle in Egypt, and you'll find it in Back to the Future Part 2.
Just before we end off on the evening, I just want to get your idea on something. Do you think pop culture, like movies specifically, have become today's form of storytelling and mythology, and really have replaced, because storytelling mythology was really a cultural communication. Now it seems that our stories, our events are almost told through pop culture. What's your idea on that?
Oh, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, I think that, when it comes to modern mythology, cinema is where it's at. Cinema is probably one of the most powerful mediums in modern-day society. You could throw television in with that, too. And these movie makers and these filmmakers are very, very well aware of this ancient mythology, and it's very powerful. And they are using it and incorporating it in these pieces. And I really believe... and it's the first line of the book, movies are the new mythology, and I really do believe that. I really believe that, that the movies like Star Wars and a lot of these movies are just so transcendent that they are, they're just so embedded in the culture that they are the new mythology. And I really do believe that cinema, and this was one of the motivations of writing the book is, was for me was just how powerful this medium of cinema is. I mean, you and I was born in the early 70s. I mean, there isn't a person my age who isn't familiar with, these movies are gone beyond cultural status, some of them. I mean, Star Wars, my God, who doesn't know of Yoda, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, or couldn't quote a line from a Star Wars movie.
It's like we almost remember... It's like we almost remember...
It's incredible. So, to me, movies are the new mythology.
Yeah, it's almost like they become a cultural and lifetime touchstones. Like, do you remember where you were 1975 during Star Wars? Tell me about that, in a sense. So it's amazing how pervasive it has become as our form of storytelling and mythology, modern mythology, as you said. And we only really scratched the surface of your book. We only talked about, I think, 3 or 4 movies from it. Talk about some of the movies that you didn't that we didn't feature on tonight's interview, and then also talk about what they can expect from the sequel. What are some of the movies there?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the movies we didn't touch on that are in cinema symbolism. I do a breakdown of the Exorcist movie. I do all 3 of the Omen movies. I do all 6 of the Star Wars movies, both trilogies. All the Matrix movies we touched on the one. I do the Lord of the Rings movies. I have a chapter for horror movies. We get more into Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, traditional monster movies from Universal Studios. We are also going to be talking some modern horror movies, such as Rosemary's Baby and The Shining, which we briefly touched on. But we get into the mythology and symbolism of some of these movies. We have a section on the goddess in film, both as a positive role model. Then we have the neurotic female, and then we have some sexual symbolism with Black Swan and movies like that, which are very deep and dark. I also touch on some of the cinematic esotericism of B-movie maker Ed Wood. Believe it or not, some of his movies have some unique themes in them. There are other movies that I touch on. James Bond, I break down some of those movies much more in depth. There are more movies that I touch on in that. Right now I'm writing Cinema Symbolism too. Some of the movies I get into in this is a book I'm writing right now. We're going to get into Gangs of New York. We're going to do some of the Alan Moore material from Hell, V for Vendetta, and Watchmen. I am revisiting Black Swan. That has a very deep alchemical theme. We're going to do some of the archetypes, mystical themes coming out of the Legends of the Old West, movies such as The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and The Magnificent Seven, the Gangs of New York movie I just mentioned. We're going to talk about some of the C.S. Lewis material, the Narnia Chronicles, as well as the Harry Potter books and movies. Those also delve into the world of Joseph Campbell and have a lot of astrological themes to them. So those are just some of the some of the movies I'll be dissecting in Cinema Symbolism 2. Many more, but those are just some of the ones off the top of my head. And again, Cinema Symbolism is out right now. Cinema Symbolism 2 is being written as we speak.
New movies, old movies, classics, a little bit of everything, all the different type of genres. You're not limited to just one type of any movie. It really is a fantastic piece. And just give out your social media pages again before I let you go for the evening.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me on Mind's Eye. I thought it was a terrific show. I'd love to come back for maybe Royal Arch or more movies. I'll leave it to you. But yeah, for me, for more information on me, go to my website, which is www.robertwsullivaniv.com, Robert W. Sullivan IV. From there are links to purchase the books, both Royal Arch and Cinema Symbolism, links to my YouTube channel. You can follow me on Twitter, links to Google+, Facebook fan pages for all my books. And again, information on me, information on how to buy the books, www.robertwsullivaniv.com. It's very easy to navigate. You can check out my YouTube channel, which has more interviews and television programs. You can go check that out. And again, links to buy the book, www.robertwsullivaniv.com is the easiest way to find me.
Once again, I'm with Robert W. Sullivan IV, talking about Cinema Symbolism, a guide to esoteric imagery in popular movies. Fantastic job. I can't wait to have you on again, Robert. Tis thee well, and I can't wait for the next one.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on, and we'll do it again in a couple of months.
All right. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this commercial break. If you like tonight's guest, don't forget to check him out. We got all his information up again. It's on our social media pages. You can check it out, Facebook.com/Mind's Eye Show, and you can also see it on Twitter. Our handle is @Mind's Eye Show. And if you did like what you hear tonight, don't forget to like us on our Facebook page, or even follow us on Twitter. Again, that's Facebook.com/Mind's Eye Show. And also Twitter, the handle is @Mind's Eye Show. Our next one, sadly, is going to be our last one. Not our final last one, but our last one before we take our annual summer break. And it is going to be a doozy. We're talking the history of mind control. It will be air on Thursday, June 25th, 2015, and we're going to be doubling down on guests. We'll be talking with the authors of the book, Marie D. Jones and Larry Flaxman. We'll be discussing the book, Mind Wars, A History of Mind Control, Surveillance, and Social Engineering by the Government, Media, and Secret Societies. So we're going to meet again then. And as always, much appreciation to you, the listener. I'm your host, Brian Turnov, for the Mind's Eye Show on Z Talk Radio.